For one weekend in October every year, Amaroo Park in Sydney becomes the focus of the world's motorcycling fraternity. This tight 1.9 kilometre circuit is the battleground for the annual Castrol 6-hour race for production motorcycles. It's difficult to explain exactly what it is that attracts the imagination of motorcycling fans. Perhaps it's the battle of speed against the clock for 6 hours. Perhaps it's the danger. Certainly it's the rider's skill. And certainly in the case of the Castrol 6-hour, it's the fact that all bikes for this race must be production motorcycles. That is, they must be machines that you and I can go and buy to ride on the streets. Every machine for this race is carefully scrutineered and checked to meet the standards sold to the public. So, for one weekend in October each year, the unique qualities of this race, recognised throughout the world, elevate the Castrol to the level of importance of 6 hours in history. To say the 6-hour has had a fairy tale run from its beginnings in 1970 to the present day would be far from the truth. Through the years it's been plagued by disqualifications, lap scoring errors and allegations of cheating. Nevertheless, the race has managed to maintain its glossy image as a showpiece for road-going motorcycles. A victory in the 6-hour is seen as an important achievement in the eyes of manufacturers and distributors. It relates directly to bike sales and a stake in the lucrative tyre market. However, what may be perfect in the rarefied atmosphere of racing may not quite be the perfect bike for the road, where areas are congested, bad conditions exist, and strictly policed speed limits are maintained.
The Japanese manufacturers particularly have taken what is good on the racetrack and said, oh, it's good on the racetrack, therefore it must be good on the road. And it may not necessarily be so.
The 6-hour today is very, very important because of the nature of Australians. Australians are very competitive in their minds and in their street motorcycles. So if a bike doesn't perform on the racetrack, then it's going to have to be very, very lucky to achieve good sales.
What's unique about the Castrol 6-hour race is that it is so strict on rules. The bikes are dead standard, and the fact that it is like the longest type of road bike race there is in the world. So it kind of really demonstrates the reliability aspects of bikes and equipment, and Australia lead the world in that area by far.
I don't know that the very first one was formed so strictly on the basis of absolute pure production. I think that came in after 3 or 4 years when the concept was proven to be successful.
Well, it all started back with the first one, and it was just a fun thing to do, to be involved in motorcycles and racing the 6-hour. That's the way it was in those days. People used to go into it with very small budgets on quite often the motorcycle they used to go to work on.
15 years after the first Castrol, bikes today can get you to work quicker than most people imagine. These high-performance bikes dominate racing, but are they king of the road as well? Brian Cowan.
But I think there are a lot of bikes that have never fronted at the 6-hour, that have never done particularly well, even when they have fronted, are probably excellent motorcycles. So in that respect, it doesn't have true relevance in giving an overall picture of what is a good motorcycle in the truest sense of the word.
it's not important at all to the road rider whether the bike is a good racetrack performer, and quite often it can be the case that it isn't a good road machine. To the extreme stage, now that the bikes are getting so race-oriented to the Grand Prix machines.
Some bikes have been given a really good reputation as a result of their 6-hour results, which they haven't really merited as an overall road bike.
A multiple bike pile-up marked the beginning of the very first Castrol 6-hour. Ambulances were kept busy in the first few hours of the race. If the attitude before the event was somewhat casual, it wasn't long before racers became serious about the business at hand. The British Empire rules supreme, with Len Attlee and Brian Hindle taking a triumph to victory in race number 1.
The leader of the pack. My folks were always putting him down. Down, down. They said he came from the wrong side of town. What do you mean when you say that he came from the wrong side of town? They told me he was bad, but I knew he was sad. That's why I fell for the leader of the pack. One day my dad said, find someone new. I had to tell my Jimmy whispering.
The 1971 race saw the first of many victories to Japan. It was fast becoming the dominant force in world motorcycle production. The Europeans would not be seen on the winner's dais again until 1977.
It was fairly casual in those days, but thinking about it now, maybe it wasn't so casual. Maybe we had a lot to worry about. We took it fairly seriously. We were looking to find the best way around the place, the quickest way around anyway, so we're going to use every avenue available to us.
Indeed, every avenue was taken by a number of people in the early years, adding to the troubled image of the race. 72, 2 of the first 3 disqualified. 74, 3 of the first 4 disqualified. 75, eligibility of European bikes doubtful. 79, tyre troubles. 80, allegations of race specials. 81, a major manufacturer withdraws. Many of the problems of the early years disappeared with the introduction of pre-race scrutineering in 1975, when all bikes entered were checked and measured internally and externally before the race to ensure compliance with the rules. Post-race disqualifications came too late. As far as the public were concerned, it was first across the line that was the winner.
I think it's a very sad thing when somebody is disqualified after the event. And as far as the world is concerned, the guy that won on the day was the winner of the race. Nobody broadcasts later on that he was disqualified and somebody else, in fact, won. So I think it's a very sad thing if somebody is disqualified from the event. And I think it's my job to make very sure that when the checkered flag drops, that's the real winner of the race. I think that's really what my job is all about, to make sure that when they all line up on the grid, they're all fair income.
Well, there's not too many teams get away with any blatant cheating anymore. There's always the minor little fiddles that a few teams get away with. But I really think it has very little influence on the actual performance of the bikes. It, to a degree, has an amount of psychological advantage to the riders and to the team if they think they have, just got a little bit tweak that makes their bike just a fraction of a second faster. It gives them the confidence or the inspiration to be able to lap a little bit faster. But I really don't think the things that are done certainly don't detract from the event.
Let's face it, it's a race after all, and you're out there to win, and you're going to use those rules to your advantage wherever possible and whenever possible. So I really don't think it's cheating, but I think it's using them to your benefit.
The moment that there is an out-and-out competition of cheats against cheats against cheats, then it'll just die a natural death, as it has in other countries. But while people want to make the thing work, it will work.
The 6 Hour has attracted a host of international riders over the years. Names like Tate, Grant, Darn, Halewood, Cooley and Crosby come to mind. Only the victory of the Kiwi Springbok pair of Hiscock and Peterson in 1981 has prevented Australians making a clean sweep for victory. But even without running a place in the Castrol 6 Hour, the Kiwi rider Graham Crosby has captivated race followers.
Didn't want to get off the motorcycle at that second stop then to hand over to Kiahara.
I wasn't going to.
Why not?
Oh, the second stop?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You're well, reluctant to get off the motorcycle.
No, actually, to be quite honest, I forgot. Oh, well, we're not sort of that good a team, you know. The riders can get out on the track and hear all around, but as far as when they come in the pits and what they're supposed to do, we always forget. Don't blame it on us. If I go too quick, you know, it means just means doing too many laps, doesn't it?
And you wouldn't want to get up there in the prize money, would you?
Oh, no, I definitely don't want to get up in the prize money after I've had so long on the pits, you know.
Graham Crosby, Master Showman, thanks very much indeed.
A real character, but enormous.
If the Castrol 6 Hour was to have one hero, then that hero would be Kenny Blake, with an amazing record including 2 solo rides, 3 wins and 2 second places. Kenny Blake was killed in a tragic accident at the Isle of Man in 1981, but in 1974 he was on a winning streak after his 73 solo victory.
I was quite apprehensive to start with about doing the entire 6 hours. It's a tight circuit, and with 60 starters of all different capacities, I thought, you know, I really wasn't too sure whether I could do the 6 hours. And it's a race where you have to pace yourself, and you can't ride flat out for 6 hours. I wasn't too sure how to go about it to start with. You must be careful for the first hour of the race, because that's when all the sort of over-excited or whatever riders all fall off, get carried away, and you know they just do stupid things. But after probably an hour and a half into the race, everybody settles down into a routine, and then you just try and be consistent and go as fast as you can and conserve tyres and all the rest of the parts on the motorcycle.
When you're thinking of great riders of the 6 Hour, I suppose, well, Kenny Blake would be the outstanding one. His ride in 1973 to take the Kawasaki 900's first win would have to stand as one of the all-time great riding performances. He, not only was it solo, one of the last of the big solo runs, but Kenny had that ability to pace himself and to pace his opposition. Yet he didn't run his own race. I mean, he responded to whatever was around him. So if a dice was on, he'd always rise to the occasion, or if he felt that he didn't want to get too mixed up with someone who was running too close to the ragged edge, he'd either sprint ahead of them or drop back.
Len Attlee partnered Blake in 1974 and remembers his ride of 1973.
Well, I think that was just a superhuman effort. On Ken's part, he's probably one of the best motorcycle riders the country's ever had. And it was just one of those, it was fitting that he did it on his own. I don't think there'd be many others capable of doing it anyway. He was just one of those type of people.
The face of the race changed in 1976 as the worth of the 6 Hour victory became recognised by manufacturers and distributors. There were huge commercial benefits from being seen and recognised as a 6 Hour winner.
The entrance of the purely professional teams like Avon and Continental back in those days, and now the tyre companies such as Pirelli, Maddich organisation and us with Dunlop have changed the complexity of the race and put a lot of money into it, have been able to do a lot more testing, and consequently the lap times have dropped significantly.
But we started, I think, in about 76, we really started to think about it. We went to sort of choreographed leathers and putting together fully trained pit crews, and it gradually built up to a crescendo in about 1978, 79. We did it primarily to put a professional approach behind it to win. It worked, we won. I think when we first became involved, it was a good fun race with young blokes that would enter it and ride and have a good time, and I guess we're partly responsible from taking the good time from it and turning it into a very professional motor race.
The mid-70s saw the 6 Hour in its heyday. The race attracted huge crowds with good weather and spectacular racing. It was a battle of riders over 6 hours, an era where the quality and the depth of Australian riding talent was the highlight of the race. However, this was to change in a few years. The race in the future would be won by tyre choice, pit work, and by a highly professional approach that relatively few teams could afford. The event, as a rider's race, was disappearing.
It's a bike race to begin with. It certainly is a tyre race, second, and probably last it's a rider's race.
The 1978 race proved to be a repeat performance of the 76 race for Team Avon, this time on Yamaha. This was the first year we saw a competitive tyre change, something previously unheard of.
103 brake horsepower out of that Honda.
By the late 70s, the Japanese manufacturers had begun a horsepower battle for the most powerful mass production motorcycle. It was also a time when the Australian government was paying close attention to high-performance motor cars such as the HO Falcon. In 1977, legislation was introduced to put the high-powered motorcycles out of the reach of inexperienced or novice riders. A 250cc limit was introduced for provisional riders.
Oh, and up in the Dunlop Loop, that is Alan Hales, the race leader, off bike number 6 in a desperate pursuit of Roger Hayes riding bike number 3. They were engaged in incredible scrap, and it has all come undone. This is his pit stop coming up for Roger Hayes now on bike number 3 as he wheels into the pit area. He's going to hand over to Jim Budd, and the question is are they going to change the rear tyre on the big, heavy Yamaha?
We were the first to change a voluntary change of tyres, and it won us the race. It won us the race not only because we had better rubber, but I really think it was a psychological advantage for Buddy when he went out there with brand new tyres on that made the difference. It was another psychological ploy. That's what motorcycle racing is about. There's a lot of psyching that goes on.
On the big Honda 6, up over the top. Neil being pushed and pressured so hard by the 1976 race winner Jim Budd. Through the loop that's brought so many people undone today. Off down towards Mazda as he tries to get round him. This is where Budd did a motocross act last year, and they're side by side as they go through there. It's just here that Budd last year on the second last lap went off the track and up the bank but held onto it somehow, and at this stage now we have a new race leader. Jim Budd on bike number 3, a new wheel in position in a brilliant pit stop at about the 3-hour mark, is now in the lead, running at a winning pace and looking very good indeed for the Avon team. Cole tucking his head in almost, pulling it off the concrete around Honda Corner. Now wrapping everything out of the Honda 6, 103 brake horsepower, and there's only fractions of a second, and you're looking at third and fourth place. And John Warrior settling into the groove now. He rode the race solo in 1975, 5.5 hours, and was still in the race lead, so he can do it. And at any moment now, the black checkered flag comes out. He's waiting in readiness. He's waiting there for Roger Hayes, who gets the checkered flag, and victory for the second time to back up his victory with Jim Budd in 1976.
To win the Castrol 6 Hour, it takes a concentrated effort from everybody, from the riders, the mechanics, the pit crew, the sponsors, absolutely everybody. It's a coordinated effort from everybody, and a certain amount of luck. Obviously, it needs to be your day as well.
1979 was a milestone in more ways than one. The race had been dominated by Kawasaki from 72 to 76, taking victory in every year. But the European marques, such as BMW and Ducati, had always been there strongly in the minor placings. Victory had finally come in 1977 with Kenny Blake and Joe Eastmuir on a BMW. But in 1979, no European bikes managed to finish. 1979 also marked the entry of Pirelli tyres, and the battle began in earnest between the tyre manufacturers.
Gone in the Castrol 6 Hour 1979, and the race leader still the Suzuki 1000 of Alan Hales and Neil Shivers.
From South Australia, the Pitmans Yamaha of Greg Pretty and former race winner Jim Budd. Boy, that takes a lot of skill for somebody to control that big bucking Yamaha at that sort of speed. Ken Blake has never done worse than fourth place until this year in 7 starts in the Castrol 6 Hour. He's had 3 victories, 2 second places, a third and a fourth. There's the American, Wes Cooling. He's 6th on the leaderboard, but that's not counting Dennis Neal. And he's put in a great performance, a professional motorcycle rider, American Superbike champion. He rode with great heart and with enormous skill at Bathurst in the rain when he'd never ridden in the rain before, and he raced hard, because in America they just don't race in the rain. They postpone car and bike races over there if it starts to rain. Look at Len Attlee down inside Budd. Can he hold on to it? Will he slide wide? The answer's yes, but he still hangs on to it. 36 years old Len Attlee, 27-year-old super sportsman Jim Budd. They've been on the track for 5.5 hours, and they're at it hammer and tongs, not letting up a bit. Budd goes through. Attlee comes inside him, and they charge off up the hill. And this is the man heading for the flag. He's going to give Suzuki their first win in the race. Honda have won it once, Kawasaki 5 times, Yamaha once, and then BMW and Triumph once each. And now victory coming to Suzuki. Down to Rothman's corner, the checkered flag awaits him. Alan Hales and Neil Chivers, son of Doug Chivers, sharing the victory in the Castrol 6 Hour.
1979 was Alan Hales' 10th attempt at the Castrol 6 Hour. The feeling of success must have been mixed with relief at finally winning.
It was fantastic, really, because there was a lot of work put in over a lot of years. Very difficult race to win. There's so many factors involved, and it's something you can't explain once it's once it's all been done and it works, comes off. It's a terrific feeling.
79, 80 and 81 placed the 6 Hour in crisis. In 1979, Pirelli entered with allegations of race special tyres. 1980, manufacturers threatened withdrawal due to changes in tyre regulations. 1981, Honda withdraw after their 80 race winner is ruled ineligible. It could be said some people viewed these years as a race between tyres rather than between bikes.
There's obvious healthy competition between tyre companies. I think it'd be fair to say that we were the first people to get directly involved in utilising production racing riders and machines on racetracks to further improve the product.
At the moment, we're helping to develop tyres for release in the United States, and because Australian conditions are so hard and torturous on tyres here, and the riders are so much faster, this type of racing is so much faster than anywhere else in the world, they've considered that if they can design a tyre to suit our conditions, it will more than adequately suit conditions throughout the rest of the world. So I think Australia's become very important in the tyre development side of things.
Main thing, it actually enables you to pinpoint improvements very quickly that are more difficult to pinpoint on the road, and takes longer to pinpoint on the road. And the 6-hour race being by far the top production race, and the one that offers, by far the most endurance testing, is probably the most important.
The top teams, such as ourselves, or mainly the leading tyre distributor teams, and also some of the motorcycle distributors, do put a pretty big effort into it. We're spending quite a big sum of money this year, again, trying to win it.
The qualifying times had never been lowered so dramatically as they were in 1980, with a drop of over 1.5 seconds from 1979. The continuing improvements in tyres were seen as a major factor in these improved times. But another was the release of bikes, which many saw as being produced for a single purpose.
This is tremendous stuff, watching these two dealing with the most treacherous conditions on motorbikes that in the dry can spin the rear wheel when they're cranked over in first, second or third gear at anything up to 160 kilometres an hour.
The most unpredictable aspect of the 6-hour has been the weather. However, the safety record of the race is outstanding, barring the chaos of that first year. Not one rider has been killed or seriously injured in the history of the race. A remarkable record that reflects the calibre of the riders in the event and the safety consciousness of the Willoughby Club and their volunteers.
115 horsepower going through the rear wheel of that bike, and it comes on in pretty snappy fashion. Fall out of Honda corner, and it's number 30, one of the outright class bikes, the Tasmanian team of Rob Scolyer, Craig Vine. The second pair only to be down. Out of Honda corner comes the race leader, Wayne Gardner, on 5. Underneath, Len Attlee on the Yamaha. Look at him get into a moment here. Trailing the boot there as he straightens up. The only Honda still running in the top 10. And the plan, though, my goodness, that bike is going hard and sliding all over the place. And frankly, how they can stay on it defeats me. The 5-hour mark, there were 264 laps completed, indicating a race distance, if the wet had continued, of around 317 laps. That'll now probably go just over 320, making it still the second shortest distance ever in the Castrol 6-hour due to the 4.5 hours of rain. Hales on bike 6, sharing it with Hiscock, is in third place. Hales desperately determined, up one place. That bike was in 13th position when Alan Hales got on it 4.5 hours ago at the end of the first hour, and has almost, well, no chance of catching the lead Honda bike number 5 that has a 2-lap margin on him with just 35.5 minutes to go.
Last year in the Castrol 6-hour motorcycle race, Dennis Neal threw second place away on the last lap. There's more than half an hour remaining in the race. Therefore, Wayne Gardner is in jeopardy. Alan Hales is in second place, which means that if something happens to Wayne Gardner, it's Alan Hales.
It's 2 laps between the two of them. And so when Hales overtakes him, he has brought it down to less than 1. There he goes. He's down. Alan Hales in second place is off. But this is the style of perhaps the fastest, certainly I think the most determined man in Australian production bike racing, Dennis Neal. Fellow riders have on occasions accused him of even kicking them or pushing knees out and saying how worried they are sometimes when they get close to Dennis Neal. But he certainly has an enormous amount of ability and determination. Honda corner for Wayne Gardner, 21 years old, rider from Wollongong. Supported by 23-year-old Victorian Andrew Johnson, who rode the Pitman's TZ750 Yamaha this year so well. And will we get the flag? No, sir. Yes, sir.
The results of the 1980 race were only decided 11 months after 3 appeals finally gave Honda and Wayne Gardner victory. The winning Honda was excluded from the 1981 race because of allegations of race specials. Brian Cowan.
I don't believe that any race specials have ever actually been built for the 6 Hour, but I do believe that the distributors here have put forward very serious proposals to the factories, particularly the Japanese factories, and they've been responded to, and the feedback from Australian production racing and the 6 Hour in particular has been taken very seriously by the factories and responded to by the engineers. So we're another part of a jigsaw.
Well, as far as the machines are concerned, I really don't think the race has influenced the development of the machines to the extent that a lot of people seem to think. They are production bikes and they're still basically built to do their job on the street. Yeah, and of course the development has paralleled their racing development. Street bike tyre-wise, there has been a lot of development there because of people like Frank Matic with the Pirelli development, who've been doing development in Australia for quite a few years, and in the last few years Dunlop and now Bridgestone and Avon have all used the race to develop high-performance sport tyres.
What we have is there have been bikes with specific attributes and strong points which have fitted the needs of the 6 Hour and the needs of Amaru Park, which itself is has totally different demands from Oran Park or Bathurst or Calder or any other racetrack that you can name. So those bikes that happen to fit that pattern have done outstandingly well.
Bikes have made a dramatic change in the years of the Castrol. 10 years is a long time in Japanese technology. The race distance has increased by 19% since the first race up until 1983. But to achieve this 19% increase in distance, fuel usage of the winning bike has increased by 50%, power by 100%, and tyre usage by 300%. 1982 saw the return of Honda with an improved version of their 1980 race winner, now sporting a dual seat, the bone of contention in 1981. This was the last year of the 1100cc machines and produced some of the best racing ever seen in the 6 Hour.
And now with Johnson really trying, it's Willing and Sharp who face jeopardy in 3rd position. And for the 3rd time in 2 hours, the rain starts coming down again, and that's brought Max Thompson and Bernie Summers on their Kawasaki 750 down.
Race leader Wayne Clark was called in by his crew just after the hour because he was too slow. He dropped to 15th place, and then the international rider Wayne Gardner, only 2 laps on the bike, started to get busy. Really busy. And things are treacherous. This is the moment when anybody could come undone. See there that the second Matic team bike, the French Alain Blanco number 7 Honda.
In 1982, the teams had a staggering range of tyres to choose from. There was an enormous selection of brands, compounds and tread patterns to suit quite different conditions. However, when all this chaos surrounding the tyre war of the earlier years had settled down, the obvious winner has been the everyday motorcyclist.
Vince Sharp, that deserves applause. What a fantastic save.
Let's have a look at that one again, if your heart can take it. Oh, how sideways can you get? And he's still got to get around the corner.
And there's bike 8, the race leader, is down. Vince Sharp has thrown it away. That's Frank Matic, the team manager and team owner, in fact. It's his money that's on the line, and he's not happy.
The race leader, 165 laps completed, 2 3/4 hours of riding. John Pace, Honda number 5.
Oh, and there's the BMW, bike 12, the Greg Johnson, Chris Oldfield BMW. And it's down and on fire from its fuel tank as the Marshal struggles with the fuel, with the fire extinguisher.
This is going to be somewhat of a high-quality and expensive Max Sennett comedy, I think. Let's have a look at it again. Well, so lucky for the rider that he was just sliding his way to a halt as the BMW was pummeling itself and bursting into flames.
1 hour, 24 minutes remaining, and Alan Blanco has now had his final pit stop, so the Mattich team hopes now rest entirely with him. Oh, that was Wayne Gardner. Oh, what an incredible save from Gardner. And here comes Gardner. Let's see it go. There he goes. He's so sideways and wrestles the bike. Have you ever seen a save like it?
I've seen a lot of motor races since I started following it in 1958, and I don't think I've ever seen a better one.
Legislative authorities worldwide were starting to show deep concern over the ever-increasing capacity of Japanese motorcycles that produced more power than the average family car, but were a fraction of the weight. In 1983, a new international limit of 1,000 cc's was introduced for production racing. But for anyone who saw the big 1100s of '82, they will never forget the performance of Wayne Gardner and John Pace.
I thought Pace was gone there. I thought he responded to the Gardner challenge and just went in too fast. This time under brakes, no.
The lap times have come from 57.5 to 56.89. They're lapping it under 57 seconds. At the end of the race, tired riders, worn tyres.
Now look at this on the outside. To the brakes,
and this is in the lead. Gardner holds it. Gardner into the lead. And Pace tries to come back on him and hasn't got it. Wayne Gardner, 5 hours, 50 minutes and 50 seconds of racing, and Pace has him again. And Gardner again. Gardner's in the lead again.
That's Bob Toomey, the leader of the 750 class, right in front on the Suzuki. And he's got his own race to race, of course, and he's going to have to get out of the way of these two racing for the lead.
You can't believe it. And Gardner.
Toomey moves aside.
I think now it's done enough. And I think Pace has got no answer. Well, it's been a brilliant performance. Fantastic. It earned every bit of it, as did everybody else. Bike 1 lap down, is running out of fuel, but the race order is Wayne Gardner for Honda and Pirelli. And the checkered flag awaits him, and Wayne Gardner, the boy from Wollongong, wins the 13th Castrol 6 Hour, his second victory in the race.
This was the second victory for the mighty CB1100R and Wayne Gardner, who by now had a blossoming international career.
The really good riders in the 6 Hour, and the one who is magical to watch at the moment is, of course, Wayne Gardner, has that ability to know precisely how fast they're going and how fast they need to go, and to quickly establish a rhythm. Amaru's such a tight, funny little track, and with so many bikes on it, it's a race of rhythm.
I think the 6 Hour race, apart from the machine and the tyre side of it, the rider on a motorcycle probably has the biggest bearing, I think, on how the thing goes. I think, unlike in car racing, it's probably 80% the car's performance, 20% the driver. It would probably be about a 70-30 ratio, I would say, on a motorcycle. About 70% the rider's ability and 30% the bike's capabilities.
In motorcycle racing, I think you could say that the last second round Amaru Park is in the rider's mind. With a car, it's the last 100th of a second that's in the driver's mind. It's so much more dangerous. He's got to get it right. He can't find out where the ragged edge is without perhaps hurting himself. So the psyching in motorcycle racing is far, far more than in motor car racing. There's enough in motor car racing, but there's a lot more in motorcycle racing.
Does the danger really worry the riders? 83 winner Rod Cox.
Well, I don't think you think about it at all when you're out there racing. Probably if you got off and walked around and had a look at things you could hit, you wouldn't go out there. But when you're riding around, you don't see it unless you fall off. And you usually don't think about it. Maybe where the crash pads are or something like that, but when you're going past lumps of cement and that, you don't, if you think about them, you're going to run off and hit them anyway, so. just keep your mind on the job.
1983 saw yet another victory for Honda, and also the first 750cc machine to take outright victory since 1972.
One lap gone in the Castrol 6-hour bike, 2 in the lead.
From the two Mattich team bikes, 11 and 8. Rob Phillips.
Oh, and there's one gone. A big fall, the rider's up. There's the wreck of the bike that Wayne Gardner was to have ridden in the Castrol 6-hour. Crashed heavily on Thursday, had to get off the bike. Glenn Taylor was put on in his place only late yesterday afternoon in a controversial decision. And now the machine is the first retirement in the Castrol 6-hour after just one lap. Oh, and he's down bike 7. Richard Scott is down. He's hit bike 4.
Graham Crosby going under Roger Hayes. Again, this Honda-Suzuki battle continuing as Crosby a bit unbelieving over Hayes' tactics down at Honda Corner.
And the shake of the fist.
Takes over 4th place again. He had been in 4th. He's been displaced back to 5th. Hayes had got him again, but Crosby doesn't like the way Hayes is riding. He's making that very apparent to him.
And here's bike 8 in 3rd position. The Len Willing machine in for the first scheduled pit stop. Willing off the bike. The very efficient Team Mattich into action.
1983 could be called the year of the pit stop. It saw a new strategy emerge for the race. No longer was it just a case of only changing tyres once if you had to. Some teams went into the race intending to put on new rubber at every pit stop.
That changed the whole impression of the 6-hour race, I think. Before, I think the idea was to come up with a compromise tyre that would last 6 hours and give a good grip, good compromise, whereas now I think the tyre companies such as ourselves, Metzler, Bridgestone and Pirelli are designing tyres which will give the ultimate grip and do lap times around this track. However, I don't think any of us have come up with a tyre that will do more than about 2 hours and give the lap times that's required to win the race. So I think you'll see this year again that the tyres on the leading teams will be changed, the rear tyres, each fuel stop.
And there we see a change for the race lead and a dice back by Malcolm Campbell. This is an incredible dice. It's been going on for 3 or 4 laps with Campbell on the outside, French on the inside, and French takes him as they go into stop corner, around and out, and Campbell will come back at him. Malcolm Campbell, the fastest qualifier yesterday. Jeff French, who got on the bike after Robbie Phillips, and he's really fought back and caught Campbell in a wonderful dice. Look at this, look at this.
Campbell rounding up. And look at French. The left hand on his knee, saying, come on, can't you do better than that? Mike's absolutely on the limit. And Phyllis not prepared to give way. But Crosby, too, tries to pull out a bit of the experience in his sleeve. Crosby is down, and he's thrown it away, and he might be able to get going again. Has he done much damage to the front? Phyllis rode under him there. They didn't touch, and it was just Crosby overdid it.
Riding at breakneck speed for 6 hours is a strain physically and mentally. Speeds are increasing, and the stakes are becoming higher. The riders have to wrestle a bike around the circuit more than once a minute for 6 hours.
Yeah, you just got to keep concentrating and keep pushing, because sometimes you end up out there by yourself with no one around you. It doesn't take long around Emeroo to someone to catch you or you to catch somebody else, but there might be a few laps there where you're by yourself and you just start drifting off. Late into the race, you start looking at the crowd and daydreaming around, and something goes wrong, you snap out of it for a while.
There's the checkered flag for Malcolm Campbell, winner of the Castrol 6-hour motorcycle race, 1983. Malcolm and Rod Cox have done it.
It's underway, 6 hours. Stock standard production motorcycles, 2.6 kilometre Oran Park Grand Prix circuit.
Great start from Robert Holden on bike 11, the Suzuki 750.
In a surprise move in 1984, the race was moved south of Sydney to Oran Park, where it will be run again this year. The longer, more open circuit with a longer main straight had teams recalculating fuel consumption and tyre wear. It also made the race more even between light, nimble bikes and the most powerful machines, somewhat handicapped at Amaroo Park by their weight and subsequent tyre wear. The move was a great success, producing a thrilling race for the entire 6 hours, the smallest winning margin in the history of the race, and the first ever win by a 500.
2 is Robert
the right-hand corner, Stephen Gall. Stephen Gall on the second of the Toshiba Yamaha bikes, bike 9.
So the race order as they go across the finishing line, the first 5 at the end of lap 1 is Len Willing with quite a handy little lead over number 12, Scott Stevens on the second Team Kawasaki bike, Rod Cox on the Bennett Honda VF1000F. Number 11 is in 4th place, Robert Holden falling back on the Suzuki 750 after a great start, and Roger Hayes on the VF1000R for Emerson Sport number 8.
Oil flag out as well.
A 131.55 for the first lap, 102.2 kilometres an hour average. Number 6 there is the pole position bike, Rob Phillis and Ian Perrow. Back, but not panicking because they know the Kawasaki's perhaps 10 kilometres an hour quicker on the straight than the Hondas, and quicker again than most of the other bikes.
Here he
Wayne
comes.
Gardner in 2nd place, but no longer. Back to 3rd as Rob Phillis goes into 2nd place now, hauling back the lead of Len Willing on a GPZ 900 Kawasaki to less than 8 seconds. Gardner had done that, and now Phillis has surged past him. Remember that Phillis on lap 1 was in 6th place. He's worked his way forward now to 2nd.
No, 3rd, because there is Paul Feeney in 2nd. So the Kawasaki's have taken over 2nd and 3rd position from Wayne Gardner, who goes wide, and he looks like he's got a problem. Has he lost a gear or what? But he almost stopped on Crash Corner.
So Gardner trying to pull away again now from Dowson, doing a grand job on number 7. He's in 5th place outright on a 500cc bike. And Michael Dowson goes round the outside of Wayne Gardner again, looking to go round the outside of John Fretton on number 18, and he does so. This is the dice for 3rd and 4th place. They're 7 seconds in arrears to Phillis on bike 6, who's 2nd, who is 9.5 seconds in arrears to Willing, who's clapped on speed in the lead.
Slow stop for the Matic Pirelli team, 35.79 seconds. They practiced in 20 seconds yesterday. They've dropped 15 seconds in the pits, 35.79. There's the new race leader, Rob Phillis.
And look at Michael Dowson on him. Brilliant riding from Dowson. Gee whiz, he's been producing some magic, and he goes into the lead over Phillis. Well, this is just brilliant stuff from Dowson on a 500cc bike, 2-stroke, 90 horsepower, and he has ridden his heart out. Did that at surface, but retired with leg cramps. And so it's not the favourite Kawasaki's leading, it's this brilliant little Yamaha with West Australian, now resident in Queensland, Michael Dowson, flashes across the line for the first time in the lead. Over Phillis, 3rd place, Wayne Gardner, 4th place, Bennett, Thompson and Sattler at least on 16, 5th place, Chivers and Holden, 6th place, I think would be bike number 4. We'll check on it. .16
seconds now is the gap from Richard Scott back to John Pace. We've got to start asking the question, with just 13 minutes remaining, has John Pace run his race? Is he running out of fuel? Does he have to take a pit stop for a security churn?
Well, John Pace, I think, is getting probably at the stage of getting that cold sweat feeling that it's getting away from him. He had that feeling when he led some years ago and Wayne Gardner caught him. Pace went back to the lead after Honda corner, down to Winfield corner, and Gardner took him again. Just fierce determination from Gardner would not let him stay in second place. Pace lost that one, and now, as I say, I think he's probably feeling that cold sweat, wondering if this one's got away from him.
We hear now that the Mentor team is going to call Pace in. They're going to have a fuel stop. It'd be silly to change riders at this stage because Pace is hot on the bike and Gardner would take at least one lap to tune in, and you can't afford that one lap.
Well, if it hasn't needed, he hasn't gone on to reserve yet. I don't see the point of the fuel stop at this stage. There's, as Billy Hill said, there's 12 minutes in the reserve tank, and there are 11 minutes remaining, less than 11 now, in this 15th Castrol 6-hour. It'll be interesting to see whether they can persuade John Pace to obey the instruction. There he is, wrestling with 238 kilos. A pile of metal that you'd be very hard-pressed to lift up if it was lying on its side. Massive motorcycle. Enormous amount of power, 122 horsepower and a 2,500 rev band between maximum torque and maximum power. Enormous amount of grunt in the mid-range.
2.2 seconds the gap. Pace has pulled back 0.4 of a second. One thing is absolutely for certain, Scott is not going to give the game away first. He's not going to go for the fuel stop until he sees the Mentor bike go in. Both of them want a fuel stop desperately because they're so close to be running out of petrol.
So much in the groove. Now it's all automatic. Braking points peeling off into corners. No conscious effort at all. Up and down through the gears. Hands, legs, brain, eyes, all reacting, body moving around on the bike. Tiredness sublimated to the sheer adrenaline and tension of fighting this situation.
256 laps down, 7 minutes remaining. 1.64 seconds the gap. I've got it. Let's check it as they come past the start-finish line. Pace is making his charge. Yes, 1.86 as they come past the finish line. Down the main straight. Pace with the throttles wide open.
21.86 second lap.
Scott more nimble in the S's.
The other critical factor that could come into it, apart from fuel and the ability of the bikes to lap, is if this man, Scott, gets caught behind something a bit quick down the straight, one of the 1 litre bikes, and has trouble getting by it, and anyway gets balked, then that could be the chance Pace wants. If you remember back to the start, we've had Len Willing lead the race, Wayne Gardner, Michael Dowson, Rob Phillis, and Robert Holden. All have led the race at some stage, but it's been dominated by these two.
Back to 3.75 seconds the gap, and you can't say that Richard Scott's got it under control even now. Fuel consumption comes into it, balked riders come into it. This race is going to be run right to the wire.
The crowd absolutely hanging on the fences, as they've been doing through most of the race. And this is one of these sporting performances where no matter what the result, you just applaud the participants who put in some magnificent performances.
He's got the checkered flag. They've held the checkered flag out now, and Richard Scott's got it. They have finished the race
3 minutes early.
By our calculations, 3 minutes early, but they've held the checkered flag out, and Richard Scott takes it by some 3.5 seconds from John Pace and Wayne Gardner. That is a turn-up for the books. That was totally unexpected. By our clocks, it's wrong.
The race was shortened to 5 hours 57 minutes, as allowed in the race regulations, should circumstances demand. With the tanks on both bikes virtually dry, it was a brilliant 5-second win to the Yamaha over the Honda.
Oh, well, I'd hope in the future to see the 6 Hour continue as an excellent race, because over the years it's been a really good race. Forgetting about the relevance of whose tyre won or whose bike won, every year has brought out some really excellent racing.
I think it'll just continue to improve. The lap times will continue to come down. It seems inconceivable this year that they can go any faster next year, but they always do. And that's just a combination of bikes, professional approach, tyres, everything. It'll continue to improve. I'm sure if we look at it in 10 years' time, we'll think we're a bunch of rank amateurs out there.
The 6 Hour has evolved into an event of international significance. Although at times controversial, it has continued to attract the imagination of the public and commercial interests. And while those interests are maintained, then the manufacturers of tyres and bikes will continue to pour money into the event in an attempt to win. The Castrol 6 Hour motorcycle race has already established itself in history. Its prestige should ensure its future.